Hi everybody and welcome back to the Ultimate Fashion History for an episode of Fave Film Fashion. In this episode we're going to get high on our own supply of fabulous 80s style as we look at the genius wardrobe for that 1983 cocaine cartel classic, Scarface. So, a couple of weeks ago I watched Scarface for the very first time. I know. How did this one slip through my net? Well, I'll explain. I have always tended to shun movies with an organized crime plotline. Don't really like stuff about the mafia or cartels. I tend to like my crime a bit more disorganized, serial killers, that kind of thing. The reason I finally geared myself up to watch Scarface is because I had just read the original book by Armitage Trail, Scarface, which of course is based on Al Capone's early life. The reason I read this book, you know I'm always going on about Dean Street Press at the end of every episode. I always say, check out our books at our publishing company, Dean Street Press. Well, Dean Street Press, we have just reissued for the first time in decades the original book, Scarface. And I loved it. It wasn't what I was expecting. The character is very different to the character of Tony that Al Pacino plays so dementedly. In the original book, Tony is only a teenager. It is set in the 1910s and early 1920s, and he's a slightly more sympathetic character. Of course, the book was the basis for the 1932 original Scarface, neither of which were at all like the 1983 version. Turns out I loved all three. I thought Al Pacino's performance in Scarface was completely demented and actually quite funny. And believe it or not, as I was watching the movie, I realized that there are a lot of similarities between Tony Montana and me. If you don't believe me, just watch on. You'll see. I'm going to be discussing both menswear and womenswear in Scarface, all of it designed by the legendary and ever modest Patricia Norris. We know this wardrobe. I'd never seen the movie and I knew this wardrobe by heart. When it comes to discussing the menswear, again, I have to give a huge shout out to Nick at Banff Style. I even stole a couple of his screenshots. Nick, I hope you're not cross. Again, go and check out Banff Style. He is a genius, this gentleman Nick, and I could not have discussed Tony's suits had it not been for my constant visits to this website. Right, off we go. I want first to talk a little bit about the setting of 1983 Scarface. Of course, the original novel and the 1932 movie was set in Chicago. That was the home of gangsters, right? But as you all know, the 1983 version was set in Miami. Of course, this made perfect sense from a narrative point of view. This was the era of the Cuban refugee crisis, and Tony was a Cuban immigrant looking for his American dream. But moreover, Miami was a cultural hotspot of the 1980s. I always talk about how every decade had its cultural hotspot, and in the 80s, it was certainly Miami. Think about movies like Body Heat, Miami Vice, The Golden Girls lived in Miami, bands like the Miami Sound Machine, and that pastel palette so prevalent in the 1980s, I think was very inspired by those wonderful deco buildings in South Beach. So the setting was perfect. Let's start by looking at some women's wear. Patty Norris's incredible vision for Michelle Pfeiffer in the role of Elvira Hancock. Talk about a Halston ripoff. Ripoff is a negative. Patty Norris would be the first to admit that she based this wardrobe on Halston. Don't believe me? Take a look at Patty Norris's beautiful work here, and then take a look at Halston. So completely inspired by the great couturier Halston in the 70s, however, not the 80s. Okay, your first question might be, well, why not just use Halston? Why not buy Halston for Michelle Pfeiffer? Well, first of all, Scarface only had a budget of $22 million, which wasn't very much. Seems like a lot for 1983, but in terms of big budget movies, it certainly wasn't. Also, real clothes, even couture, don't always work for film. First of all, you need multiple versions of each dress. Textiles have to be a little bit different, so they photograph in a particular way and work with particular light. So the fact that Patricia Norris created this iconic look on a very small budget speaks volumes to her talent, but also to her understanding of character and narrative. The most iconic gown that Michelle Pfeiffer wears in Scarface is undoubtedly this one. The fitted drop waist, bias cut teal dress with diamante straps, backless. It's beautiful. This is such a wonderfully tailored dress with that long slit in the leg. So famous is this dress that Rihanna had it reproduced and is wearing it here, and it looks fabulous on both of these beautiful ladies. It's when you take all of these gowns together and look at them on one screen, you realize that what Patty Norris did was so clever. She gave this character, Elvira, a very particular taste. But it's a very 70s look, sexy, slinky, sinuous, barely there. Now the character, Elvira, was surrounded by money. So why did she not dress like this? This is how a glamorous, affluent woman would have dressed in the early 1980s. This, of course, is the wonderful Joan Collins in Dynasty. And yet, Patty Norris made a decision to actually take this character back in terms of silhouette to this very simple, sexy, barely there silhouette. Why? Because Elvira was barely there as a person. She was an empty vessel. She was a woman who had sold her soul. Also, she was from a different class to Tony. And so I think that this minimal approach spoke to the difference in class and his aspirations. But I think, moreover, it really spoke to the character of Elvira. She wore clothes that were barely there because she was barely there. This was a woman who really was the quintessential ice maiden. And it's only in that scene in the restaurant when she loses her temper and has her breakdown do we realize that underneath this ice there is, or at least there once was, an actual woman. And talk about borrowing from couture to tell a story and build a character. I absolutely adore this white skirt suit, which of course is Patty Norris's nod to Armani and power dressing of the 80s. But female wardrobe in Scarface is also used to tell you an awful lot about Tony's character. There he is with his sister, and when he sees her wearing this dress, he has one of his famous meltdowns. He thinks it's too sexy, it's inappropriate, and yet the woman he purports to love and pursues throughout the movie until he finally marries her wears an almost identical dress. This tells you a lot about Tony. He genuinely loves his sister and wants to protect her. Michelle Pfeiffer's character, Elvira, that's his arm candy. She's a symbol of his conquest. The sexier she dresses, the better, the more important it makes Tony look. So Patricia Norris has used costume very cleverly here to develop Tony's character. So much has been written and said about Al Pacino's wardrobe in Scarface, and I think a lot of it has been a little bit unfair. Yes, everybody's spoken to how beautifully Patricia Norris dressed him to character, but words like tacky have been bandied around, and I'm going to actually defend some of Tony's wardrobe choices here. When we first meet him, He is quite literally fresh off the boat. He arrives in America as a Cuban refugee in search of the American dream, which he certainly finds. And he sports a beautiful array of big tropical print aloha shirts. The tropical print, of course, brilliantly speaks to his heritage, his Caribbean background. But I wouldn't say that they were tacky. It has been said that when the drug money starts rolling in, Tony stops wearing the aloha shirts. That's true. However, his BFF, Manny, who we first meet wearing this tank top when the drug money starts rolling in, he starts wearing aloha shirts and big tropical prints in imitation of Tony, somebody he obviously looks up to. I think the choice of putting Al Pacino in these aloha shirts was brilliant on so many levels. Yes, it speaks to his Caribbean heritage. Yes, this is the sort of garment that people might donate to refugees arriving in the country. But I think, moreover, Tony would have been impressed with Magnum P.I., with Tom Selleck. Magnum P.I. debuted in 1980, and you can imagine the character of Tony Montana thinking that this was a cool, sexy guy who got all the girls. Anyway, Tony loved big tropical prints, and who else loves big tropical prints? Well, you know that I do, so this is the first indication we have that me and Tony Montana are not that different. And there's me in a big tropical print with David Wolfe. Yes, my dad. Hi, Dad. I'm not going to talk about all of Tony's suits, but I'm certainly going to talk about this one, his famous and now quite iconic white suit with notch lapels, padded shoulders, long double vents, single-breasted waistcoat, 5 buttons and jetted lower pockets. Everybody who has spoken about this suit, apart from Nick at Banff Style, who really gets it, has said this suit is so tacky. Tony is inspired here by Saturday Night Fever and John Travolta's iconic suit, which of course was 5 or 6 years earlier. Yes, most certainly Tony Montana would have been very impressed with John Travolta in Saturday Night Fever, but who else wore white suits in the 70s? I will use any excuse to get Hervé Villechaize into a UFH, but seriously, the white suits in Fantasy Island were symbolic. They symbolize people getting their dreams, their fantasies coming to life. And so I think that all of these things pull into Tony's white suit. I think Tony Montana would definitely have watched Fantasy Island and been quite impressed with it. However, there is nothing intrinsically tacky about a white suit. Do you know who else wore a white suit in the 80s? Well, of course, Don Johnson in Miami Vice. Why is his suit not tacky and Tony Montana's does look a little bit tacky? Well, because Tony Montana's is double-breasted. He wears it with a red shirt, with a big splayed collar. If he'd have worn it with a pastel blue Ringer t-shirt, nobody would say that Tony was tacky. Yes, taken alone, Tony might look a bit flashy, a little bit déclassé, even a little bit gauche, but put him with his gang and he fits right in. Why? Because Patricia Norris dressed all of Tony's cartel in a similar style. And this is a cinematic tradition and a historic tradition when it comes to gang wear. Look at the gangs in West Side Story. These are the Sharks, all dressed in the same palette. And look at the real-life gangsters, Al Capone's gang in the 1920s, all dressed very similarly. So Patricia Norris is really playing on this cinematic and historic fact that gang members dress alike. But of course, this is the most famous of Tony's suits, designed by Patricia Norris, but as with all of Tony's suits, it was actually created by the Paramount tailor, Tommy Velasco. And boy, did he create an iconic suit. We all know it, even if we haven't seen the movie. It looks black, but it's actually a very dark navy blue with chalk stripes that alternate between a thick double stripe and a thin single stripe. Single-breasted jacket. It has a two-button front and is worn with a white shirt. Now this pinstripe, which of course he wears during the climactic final scene, is a complete homage to the real Al Capone and the famous pinstripe suit he wears in this iconic mugshot. Here you get a better glimpse of the suit. There's Tony having a bit of a moment with some cocaine. And there is the actual suit. And you can see that the stripes, that chalk stripe, is much more prevalent in real life than it actually photographs in the movie. What an iconic suit. This is the label inside the actual suit that says Al Pacino. But this suit comes with a lot of symbolism in terms of some of the movie's overarching themes. When we first see Tony wearing it, he has a red tie. So a blue suit, a white shirt, and a red tie, red, white, and blue. And then the red of the tie is later replaced with blood, both the blood of his enemies and then ultimately his own. Red, white, and blue, of course, they are the colors of the Cuban flag that speaks to Tony's ancestry and heritage. But of course, they're also the colors of the American flag. And Tony really symbolizes the American dream, doesn't he? The American dream gone right, albeit in a horribly criminal and violent way, and then the American dream gone horribly wrong. This suit is so iconic that he always seems to be wearing it when he appears as an action figure or doll. Who would want a Tony Montana doll? Let's look at Tony's bling. He wears 2 gold chains, a large Cuban-style chain necklace and a thinner rope necklace, but the main event is undoubtedly his watch. Let me zoom in. This was the watch of the early 1980s. It's by Omega. It's called La Magique. There were less than 650 produced in 1981. It was not only the most expensive watch on the market, but also the thinnest. Now, I wondered why Tony wasn't wearing a Rolex. Hey, a big gold Rolex. That was the blingy watch of the early 1980s. But I think that it would have appealed to Tony, the fact that this was such a limited edition. It was so thin, it was so expensive, and I think he thought it classed him up a bit. And here we have another similarity between me and Tony Montana, because my watch is an Omega watch as well. I want to talk a little bit about Patricia Norris's brilliant use of palette. She was famous for working with set designers, working with the lighting guys, and of course directors and writers, before she even started designing costume. Here is a great example of how she used the colors and the lighting of the set to create Tony's outfit here, that pale pink shirt and that slightly mauvey grey jacket. And here's another great example of how Patricia Norris used palette. You can see the set, you can see the lighting, and that is the color palette for this scene. And for Michelle Pfeiffer's gown, she drew on the teal range in this palette. Tony's tan suit and chocolate brown shirt work perfectly with the interior of that convertible, but when you put the whole scene together and you see that Manny is dressed in the same palette, you really get a sense of just how clever Patricia Norris was and what a brilliant colorist she was. Now, a lot of people have said some very unkind things about Tony's mansion. They say it's tacky, they say it's nouveau riche, it's gauche, it's déclassé. I love it. I'd love to live in Tony's mansion. I think actually over the past 20 years or so, our love of minimalism has sort of confused or muddied the waters between opulence and tackiness. Yes, it's a little bit over the top, but personally, I love it. Hollywood Regency is one of my favorite interior design concepts. There is Tony in his office with the dark walls and all of that gold. Well, guess who else likes dark walls and lots of gold? We do. Okay, our walls are not black, but they are a very dark indigo. Actually much darker than photographed here. Here is another picture of our living room with our dark walls and all of our gold. We can't get enough gold. 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 We love it. Is it Tony Montana-esque? Yes. But we did not base our wall colour on Tony Montana's mansion. But we did steal it from a TV show. Feud. When we watched Feud a few months ago, we realised that Joan Crawford's living room walls were exactly the colour we wanted our living room walls. And so, yep, our whole interior concept is based on Feud. I would love to cover our furniture in plastic a la Joan, but I don't think Rupert will let me. People have also made fun of Tony's rather opulent bathroom with his huge round bathtub, gold chairs, and 5 televisions. Come on, we all want this bathroom. I know I do. I certainly want this vanity with gold cherubs and gold mirrors. I love Hollywood Regency. And you know I am not going to leave this episode without doing this. Say hello to my little friend. Well, this episode was a bit off the beaten track for us, wasn't it? I hope you enjoyed it, though. You can contact me through my website, amandahallay.com. Join our Facebook group. We have over 3,000 members over there now, and we always have a groovy time. Check out those books on Dean Street Press. I'll be back very soon, so just click that little circle to subscribe. And don't forget to click that notification bell, and you'll be notified when there's a new episode up on the Ultimate Fashion History. And go to Amazon, buy Scarface, you'll love it. And until then, remember, the world is yours. Thanks for watching and bye for now.